Welcome to Cybersecurity Insights. I'm your host, Matthew Rosenquist, CISO, Industry Cybersecurity Strategist and Advisor. And today, we're going to talk about upgrading enterprise data backup and recovery ecosystems to post-quantum cryptography standards. And I'm going to be talking with Michael Fasulo. Michael is the Senior Director of Portfolio Marketing at Commvault, which recently announced a move to enable customers to transition to post-quantum algorithms. And such a transition is, well, it's absolutely needed across the industry, especially when it comes to protecting sensitive data from emerging risks that quantum computing brings. It is an inevitability as quantum computers gain in power and will eventually be able to undermine much of the encryption the world uses today. Welcome, Michael. Thank you for coming and sharing this journey.
Thanks for having me. And I'm going to steal some of that talk track. I like the way you put it.
Go for it. Go for it.
Awesome.
I mean, quantum is there's so much to talk about quantum, whether it's the hardware, whether it's the algorithms it's such a great
Yes.
topic. And we know that cliff is coming. So, I alluded to it a little bit, but can you explain exactly what post-quantum cryptography is and why it's needed by organizations that specifically want to protect their sensitive information?
Yeah, sure thing. So PQC is really these cryptographic algorithms that are designed to secure against both classical and quantum machines. So they'll encapsulate both because classical compute threats don't go away. And, the quantum machines do pose a significant threat, as you mentioned. So as these quantum machines and their associated algorithms become very efficient at processing large numbers and log mathematics, this is really where asymmetric cryptography falls short. So a lot of times you'll hear harvest now, decrypt later as kind of the main threat that people are talking about. And this is really where threat actors will exfiltrate the data today. Hopefully they won't be able to, but in the future, when these quantum machines and these algorithms get to a point where they'll be able to decrypt the data and then obviously hold the data for ransom. So for us, like we talk to a lot of our customers where long-term, highly sensitive data has a really long shelf life, these are the types of scenarios that we want to protect our customers from. And that's why we decided to provide PQC as part of our platform.
Got it. And you had mentioned asymmetric encryption. And I don't want to get too geeky here between symmetric and asymmetric, but can you
Yes,
kind of give an example of asymmetric encryption and what we use it for, right? Some
sure.
examples.
Yeah, so asymmetric encryption, and I'll probably provide a higher level, not to get like super in the weeds, but asymmetric encryption is usually used on the network to establish, when you have a private and a key pair. So understanding that if you have an encrypted tunnel and that encrypted tunnel can be broken, then even if we're passing like symmetric keys like AES and encrypted data, if you can steal enough where you got the key, then you could decrypt something that's quantum resistant like AES. So, super important that we protect asymmetric encryption from these types of threats because it would then expose the capabilities of exploiting, the symmetric key exchange.
Got it. Got it. Now, NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology, it's been working with the cryptology industry since what, 2016,
Very long
really
time.
to
Yeah,
identify those replacement algorithms
that's right.
that, well, all modern technology, right? The solutions they're really going to need. And I know they've got 5 so far. That number grew from, originally just 4, 2, and 2 backups to now 5. How will systems and users determine if they need these new algorithms and then which ones to implement out of the 5? It seems very confusing.
Yeah, totally. So you're exactly right. And when we first started doing our research, we took the leap to provide crypto agility, right? That's the ability for us to be able to provide these different algorithms for these different threats, depending on how even the scenarios are going to evolve. So having that flexibility provides our customers, a lot of comfort in knowing that not only threats of today, but threats of tomorrow. We could have some type of resistance against them. And I would say this unpredictability is putting a lot of vendors on their toes to make sure that they can deliver their products. And we encourage our customers to be vigilant and prepared for this space that's going to continue to evolve. So getting back to the comment about NIST going back 2016, they really consulted with the top minds in cryptography at the time to come up with these better ways to prevent these types of threats from happening. So there's a lot of gravity to that scenario. But what I would say is these new algorithms, as they're created, it's really important to vendors to be able to provide them to their customers. And if for some reason, these mathematical calculations can be cracked, there needs to have backups. So you mentioned the fifth algorithm for an example. HQC, I'm not going to try to say its name because it's really complicated and it's a tongue twister and I always mess it up. But HQC was really the backup that was created that NIST is recommending to provide a backup to a KEM or Kyber. And why that's important is because it uses error correcting code mathematics instead of lattice-based mathematics. Mm-hmm. So if someone happens to crack the lattice-based mathematics with quantum and quantum-based algorithms, then there's already a backup in place. So you can even see that NIST, even though, think about the foreshadowing they did back in 2016, they're still doing that today and making sure that there's no single point of failure. So really, really crazy time that we're in. And, there's a lot of current events that I think is really trying to accelerate how quantum machines are utilizing different technology so that, they don't need supercooling. The algorithms are improving, their error correcting codes are becoming, really efficient. So lots of things happening in the space. So that unpredictability, I think, is allowing people to react and be overly cautious. And that overly caution is actually a good thing.
Yeah, and I love what you mentioned, right? Crypto agility and the fact that back in 2016, when they reached out to the community, there were dozens of algorithms that were put forth.
That's
And
right.
through that time, many have been tested. And even some of the top ones that they were going to go to started showing some cracks. And so
That's
they
right.
did, have forethought and say, okay, we're going to need backups. And even the 5 that they've approved now, we don't know around the corner. It may, one of them may get cracked, and having that agility to be able to adapt to that and then quickly swap that out and swap something in. I mean, that's in my mind, that's going to be paramount moving forward.
Absolutely.
We've always had to replace algorithms in the past, but typically there was enough time. People,
right, there
were
was a
confident
transition
about it. But it's a brave new world. It
No
really is. So these new algorithms, they can be power hungry. I mean, they're important because they provide more protection, but they can also consume a lot more compute power. So how do organizations then manage that trade-off between I want advanced security and protection for my most sensitive data, but at the same time, I don't want blistering overhead and cratering of my systems? It seems like a scale that you have to manage. What are your thoughts in this space?
Yeah, so like you said, there's a balancing act that you're going to have to do, and we recommend our customers do like deep data discovery and classification of their data to not only gain awareness of the data and the silos that they have their data in, but also the sensitivity of it, and then apply these techniques and different encryption levels and things to just that subset of data. So for Commvault customers, we have a product called Risk Analysis, and that does data discovery and classification. We recommend our customers use that across all these different silos to really understand and apply these controls. And then obviously we have policies and automation and other things that make it really easy to, adapt and adopt these technologies to protect that ultra sensitive data and to keep an eye on these things. And one of the other cool things about Risk Analysis, which is kind of unique to it against the rest of our portfolio, is that it functions not only on backed up data, but also live data. So you could do deep data discovery and classification, relatively fast, get a real good snapshot, and then apply these controls as necessary.
So you're almost talking about a paradigm shift, right? Where it's not one size fits all. We're not just going to use this standard and all our data is going to be encrypted. What you're talking about is variances because of dealing with that trade-off. which means you're moving away from that manual set it and forget it. You need tools and policies and processes that are automated to then be able to manage that once you've determined, this type of protection for this data, but not this data, and this data flows needs to have a certain, encryption. It sounds like it gets much more complex for organizations that haven't kind of thought it through or have the capabilities to manage this. Is that going to be a barrier for companies moving forward?
It depends if they want to take the hard way or the easy way. What I would say is, look, my father used to say this. He used to say, right tool, right job. So, use that strategically. And if you think about, encryption in general, I mean, modern compute is so fast that I think, and it's the compute is offloaded to an extent. So, the amount of cycles it consumes is not that great. But when we talk about PQC, it's going to be noticeable. And what that translates to, like if we're talking about cloud instances, is having to go to the next to scale up to the next instance. That's actually double the price. So if you think about it, it's really important to responsibly think about where you're going to apply these things. And these are the types of tools that we have in the product to kind of allow you to balance that. And then the other thing that we recommend, besides really understanding the data, is understanding where you're using encryption and the different key lengths and the different techniques that you're using. So we have another product called Security IQ that kind of gives you that bird's eye view of where is encryption being applied, what are the keys, what are the techniques, key sizes, and all those things, so that people can really get an understanding of how secure their data is, their pipelines are, and even how their compute and memory is being used, because we also protect, data in use security cases.
So you mentioned, an ugly aspect of all this, right? The price, the cost. And, if we accept that switching to stronger algorithms is the natural order of things, do you think vendors should charge customers for the upgrade to quantum resistant
Absolutely not.
algorithms?
Come
And,
on.
don't speak from a shareholder, right, position, but from the customer position, because it sounds like there's already going to be more overhead that we have to manage, more complexity we have to manage, right? We have to find the right tools and all that.
Yeah.
Should they be charged for this natural upgrade?
Yeah. So I would say absolutely not. And, with Commvault, it's part of our platform security pledge. So, our customers get it for free. But in general, it's like, who charges to encrypt data? Like, just having good data security or even network security is like super important. And everyone, I mean, with the proliferation of threats in today's landscape, it doesn't even make sense for vendors to charge for these types of things. So with Commvault, we don't charge for it. And I would advocate that, vendors that are thinking about charging for PQC should think about, really building PQC as a crypto agility framework in your product, reduce your burden for developing and upkeeping PQC in the future, and provide it to their customers free of charge.
I like the idea. My concern is there's going to be a lot of vendors that see that bag of money on the table and go, no, it's a significant investment to go do this
Sure.
and to enable the customers, and it's a tremendous value. We should be upselling this, right? Here's an add-on. So anyway, I'll move on from that one because I'll just get frustrated. But the move to quantum resistant algorithms, it does represent a significant shift in the underlying architecture. So I mean, I can understand why service vendors are going to say, yes, we have to invest in this, and this is going to cost it. But it is essential for data protection. When we look at that, and you mentioned crypto agility, when we look at this problem not just being a problem and you apply a fix and you're done, but you have to maintain that agility moving forward, is now the right time, and understanding the chaos that we're now getting ourselves into, to design in forward-looking capabilities to easily manage and update and integrate future algorithms and deprecate others into all of these tools? Is now our moment to do that in the tech industry?
Yeah, if there's one thing I learned at Commvault in my 2+ decades here, is like timing is everything. And there's been stuff that we've built that, was premature and we put it on the shelf. But this is not one of those scenarios. The time is now. And I think people should start to gear up, take inventory of their data footprint, understand and make sure that they can see all of the data across, and then determine, where they should apply PQC. I think that's a really important first step. The other thing that I think is super important in a topic like this is even early on when we used to have these conversations internally, there wasn't a lot of key stakeholders that really wanted to pursue these types of things. So it's really important to be a good internal advocate, kind of cut through the hype, provide like the ground truth of the scenarios that we're in, where data is affected or is not affected, and really have like executive buy-in on these types of things. Because although we talk about harvest now, decrypt later, there's other threat vectors, and I'm sure if you've been watching the news the last couple of weeks, people are talking about crypto and all these other scenarios with certificate authorities. So these are real threats, and it's a looming threat, and there's so much uncertainty on how fast it's going to accelerate because not too many months ago people were saying this is 20 years out, and now people have revised this to be the next 5 or 10 years. So I think people are finally having the right conversations, but internally, whether you're a customer or a vendor, you should really be having these internal conversations, have some executive buy-in, and then proceed with what is known. And we're all blessed that NIST is really giving us a lot of good guidance on where to apply these things, how we can get things into the product, and talking about crypto agility. So, it's not everyone's discovering uncharted land. Some of these things are relatively well defined, and people should be adapting and adopting to that. And I would say the other component to that is if quantum does hit a Gen AI like stride, people better be really careful on sleeping on this type of technology to protect themselves.
Yeah. I mean, we're moving towards a cliff, and timing is everything. You want to get there before the attackers can decrypt all your data, undermine everything that you have. And NIST has done a great job with the algorithms, but let me ask kind of a side question here, because I've worked with lots of companies and encryption in the hardware and firmware and OSs and apps. History has definitely shown that implementing encryption can be really easy. Oh, let me just slap something together. But implementing it securely
Yeah.
can be really problematic. It can be extremely difficult. So, from the perspective of people thinking, oh, I'm just going to slap in some new libraries and I'm good to go,
Yeah.
right? What kind of advice would you give with your background in history and building this at Commvault? What are some of the challenges in doing it right?
Yeah. So I think first of all, like people need to be fixated on the customer experience. I know we haven't gotten into like super deep in this particular conversation, but like quantum is a pretty abstract thing to most people that are outside of this space, and even cryptography is. And then if you start to unpack like some of the mathematics and other things, like this is a super complicated thing. And the idea is that even if the implementation from a vendor standpoint is not complex, we shouldn't be passing that complexity to our customers. So implementing PQC and using some of the tactics that I've already mentioned really remove a lot of that friction and complication. So customers don't have to worry about, am I using the lattice-based one? Am I using the error correcting code one? How do I make sure? Like the whole idea would be it should be checkbox simple, like we've implemented it, and then have a policy that gets applied that is rule-based, so that as we use these tools to discover the data, to discover things that have high sensitivity or severity, it's really important that these policies allow to drive this automation so that our customers can set it and forget it and not have to worry about all the complications that come with quantum. And then as we get new guidance from NIST, as a vendor, we provide, very smart defaults to our customers, and we remove, again, that friction of having to upkeep and understand, do I pick X, Y, or Z? We always provide, a best practice default. And then we do provide the optionality if someone wants to use one of the other ones for some specific use case. So super, super important that not only people think about it from a data protection standpoint, but as I mentioned before, there's other attack vectors that are going to be exposed in an environment. So it's super critical that people take not only inventory of the data, like I'm saying from my standpoint, but also their key stores and all the other things that may be vulnerable, because an environment, it's only going to be as strong as its weakest link. So super, super important to have that internal stakeholders to talk about these things so that not only do admins, backup admins, infrastructure admins, but everybody else is contributing to really understanding how quantum threats may evolve and protecting them, full sweep throughout the entire environment.
Well, you mentioned all those stakeholders, right? And unfortunately, especially the larger organizations, that matrix gets very
Super,
complex,
yep.
right? It's not just cybersecurity, it's not just IT, it's legal, and it's all the different product groups, and it's and third-party vendors, and right, it starts getting extraordinarily complex. So, how should these stakeholders partner together to make sure that all the necessary internally developed systems, as well as third party vendors, are integrating quantum resistant algorithms properly and in a timely manner? Any
Yes.
insights there?
Yeah, super important. And I think it really becomes a question of be inquisitive and ask questions. I think that part's super important. And one of the other things, and I was on LinkedIn earlier today, and I noticed you were having some dialogue on some subject matter, aligned to cybersecurity. I think that level of transparency is ultra critical on a global stage. Having all this type of rich conversation, whether it's in LinkedIn or Substack or any of these other locations where you could have a one-to-many conversation with some level of transparency to say, like, look, you may not be hearing this in the news, but these things are happening, and sure, like breaches are a shielded thing. These types of threats are a shielded thing, but it downplays the severity and the frequency in which these things are happening. So I think as stakeholders, both internally and on the global stage, it's super important to have really transparent dialogue about these things. Talk about the frequency, talk about how catastrophes, how we could avoid these catastrophes, and then really have a good level set and cut through the hype so that people can really understand, yes, this is a threat that I should be concerned about. And here's what we need to do. Here are some of the vendors that are implementing this the right way, the quick way, so that I'm protected. Here are some examples of ones that may not be doing it as good, but provide them with those good examples to provide some of that further guidance so you can remain protected is super paramount as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I agree. So, in that kind of discussion, that communication, the most important aspect in this whole ambiguous discussion is one, you want to beat to the finish line the attackers, right? In getting your algorithms updated and implemented beforehand. So the question kind of comes back to, if I'm a product owner or if I'm an IT or somebody that owns the budget, when is it gonna happen? So my last question to you, and I know it's a crystal ball, right? You got to pull that out. You got to make some guesses, but you're neck deep in this. You've talked about the attackers out there. You've referenced nation states that have billions of dollars that are thrown into this, that are developing their own quantum technologies, their own farms, right, to be able to do this at scale. That they've been harvesting data for over a decade, right? That they want to then decrypt later. Where does your crystal ball say that we need to have this in place? Not start thinking about it, not, oh no, let's get it done tomorrow, but when do you think the world, the critical infrastructures out there really need to have this in place? What is your personal deadline for this?
No, it's that simple. It's now.
Wow, that's a
It's now.
very short, concise answer. Okay,
Yeah.
would you
Yeah.
like to elaborate on why now?
And as you said, right, it's not we're not worried about the script kiddies and the lone wolves, right? These quantum machines are not going to be accessible to people like ourselves for nefarious reasons, right? Like, look, you can go get quantum hours in the hyperscalers or through IBM like right now, but obviously there's tons of safeguards, and you'd have to know all these things. But in a couple of years, you're going to see these organized cyber criminal syndicates and nation state actors like exploiting this. And the reason why that's so critical is because these orchestrated attacks are going to be very purposeful, and they're going to be very damaging. And if you already know that you're in possession of like super long-term sensitive data that could do irreparable damage, both financially, to brand, to governments, to weapon systems. Like that stuff has to be protected today. It has to be, and it probably should have been before, sometime before. So, like super critical that people start to do this now. And if you have older data that would also fall into this footprint, having a platform like ours that allows you to re-encrypt would also be very helpful, especially if it's going to be in infrastructure that could be exposed. And obviously, usually sensitive data isn't. But these are again these considerations that people should be taking. And it is also worth mentioning that PQC is a layer of your security posture. It doesn't replace anything. It's just another additional layer. So you still have to prevent breaches. You should still be looking at network traffic. You should still be looking at, multi-factor authorization, multi-person authorization for things. Like all of those things should still be in place. This just becomes an additional layer for this particular attack vector of how we know it's going to function today. And if it changes tomorrow, this is why the crypto agility is super important. This is why it's still important to have all these additional layers. So
I think those are, it's just incredible insights. Michael is the Senior Director of Portfolio Marketing at Commvault. Check out what the brilliant people at Commvault have done to embrace post-quantum cryptography and empower their customers to easily benefit from the next generation of secure algorithms for data security. Michael, thank you for sharing your insights today.
appreciate you having me. Appreciate the questions too. Awesome chat.
And thank you all for watching, and a big thanks to Commvault for sponsoring this episode. Be sure to subscribe and catch all the Cybersecurity Vault episodes where we chat with industry leaders to dive into the most relevant and interesting cybersecurity challenges, perspectives, and best practices.